Rio de Janeiro, 1978. A city of light, but the shadows here are deeper than most people realize. In a crowded hospital ward, a mother holds her newborn son. His name is Roberto. She is tired, but she is happy. She doesn't know that across the hall, someone is watching. Someone who has been rehearsing a lie for 9 months. A woman walks in wearing a white coat. She has a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. She says she needs to take the baby for a quick exam. The mother lets go, and in that single second, a life is erased. The baby named Roberto disappears. 25 years later, a man named Pedro Dom becomes the most wanted criminal in Brazil. The cat burglar of the favelas. What nobody knew, not even the man himself, was that Pedro Dom didn't exist. He was a ghost living in another boy's body. This is the story of a life built on a foundation of sand. Look at the neon reflecting on the wet pavement. They call Rio the marvelous city, but the meter is running, and I'll tell you the truth. Every brick in this town has a secret. Some people are born into their names. Others have their names stolen before they can even speak. Sit back. We're heading into the heart of the deception. The Rio of the late 70s was a fever dream. The air was thick with salt from the Atlantic and the smell of diesel. It was a time of transition. The skyscrapers of Ipanema were rising, while the favelas were beginning to crawl up the hillsides like a slow tide. In the middle class, appearance was everything. A family wasn't complete without a son, and for a woman named Aurora, that social pressure turned into a predatory obsession. She didn't want a child. She wanted the status of motherhood. The setting was the Santa Casa de Misericordia, a place of healing that, on that night, became a crime scene. The kidnapping wasn't a professional hit. It was a crime of opportunity, fueled by a desperation so cold it felt like a surgical strike. The police in 1978 didn't have DNA. They didn't have cameras. They had paper files and intuition. And for a poor mother like Ilma, intuition wasn't enough to fight a woman who looked like she belonged in the upper class. The boy grew up in a world of privilege and pain. He was beautiful, blonde, charismatic, but there was always a fracture in his soul. He was raised by Victor, a man of the law, a police officer dedicated to order. Imagine the irony. A man who spends his days hunting criminals, coming home to kiss a son who was, himself, the fruit of a felony. Victor looked at the boy and saw a reflection of himself, but the boy looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. By the time the 90s arrived, the humidity of Rio was being replaced by the smoke of a burgeoning drug war. The boy, now Pedro, was drawn to the chaos. He didn't know why he felt like an outsider in his own home. He didn't know that every birthday he celebrated was a date stolen from a woman he'd never met. The setting was ripe for a tragedy. A city on fire, a family built on a kidnapping, and a boy who was about to become a monster because he couldn't find the truth. Investigators noticed something unexpected years later. They noticed that Pedro Dom didn't just rob houses. He entered them with a strange familiarity, as if he were looking for something he lost, something he couldn't name. The meter is ticking, and the truth is about to come out in the most violent way possible. A kidnapping is not always a loud event. Sometimes, it's as quiet as a door closing in a hallway. April 1978. The Santa Casa Hospital in Rio was a labyrinth of echoing corridors and high ceilings. Ilma, the biological mother, was in a haze of post-labor exhaustion. The woman who entered her room didn't look like a villain. She looked like authority. White coat, professional posture. She took the baby, Roberto, for a routine exam. Minutes turned into an hour. An hour turned into a cold realization. When Ilma asked the nurses where her son was, she was met with blank stares. What son? Who took him? The hospital staff scrambled. The hallways were searched, but the woman was gone. The baby was gone. The records from that night, incomplete, lost in the bureaucracy of a city that was growing too fast to care. Ilma left that hospital with empty arms and a name that didn't belong to anyone anymore. While Ilma was screaming into the void, the boy was being reborn. Aurora, the kidnapper, took him to a world far from the hospital's sterile walls. She gave him a new birthday, a new family tree, a new identity, Pedro. He was raised in the shadow of the law. His father, Victor, was a man who believed in the badge. He was a specialist in intelligence, a man trained to spot lies from a mile away, but he couldn't see the one sitting at his dinner table. As Pedro grew, he was the picture of the golden boy. Blonde hair, blue eyes, an easy smile. But inside, something was misaligned. Investigators noticed something unexpected in his early school records. A lack of focus, a sudden, sharp turn toward rebellion. The middle-class life in the south zone of Rio de Janeiro, the private schools, the security, it felt like a cage to him. By the time Pedro reached his teens, the cracks were wide enough to fall through. He discovered the high of the streets. First, the adrenaline of the climb. He was agile. He could scale buildings like a cat. He didn't rob for bread. He robbed for the rush. He became Pedro Dom. The name started to appear in police files, the same files his father, Victor, had spent his life organizing. Imagine the dinner conversations. A father talking about the rising tide of crime, while his son sat across from him with stolen jewelry in his pocket. Pedro was becoming a legend in the favelas. He was the white boy who could bridge the gap between the rich and the poor. He knew the codes of the elite because he was raised by them, and he used those codes to dismantle them. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Ilma was living a parallel life of ghost hunting. For 25 years, she never stopped. She visited police stations where officers laughed at her. She consulted psychics who gave her false hope for 20 reyes. She kept a small box with the only thing she had left, a hospital bracelet and a blurry memory of a woman's face. The investigation into the disappearance of Roberto had long since been filed under cold. The police had bigger problems: the rise of the drug cartels, the violence of the 90s. A missing baby from 1978 was a footnote in a city that was bleeding. But a mother's memory is a dangerous thing. It doesn't follow the statute of limitations. She watched the news every night. She saw the faces of the arrested, the faces of the dead. She was looking for a ghost. And then, in the early 2000s, the face of Rio's most notorious burglar hit the front pages. Pedro Dom, the cat burglar. Ilma looked at the photograph. She didn't see a criminal. She saw the eyes of the man she had imagined her son would become. What happened next still makes no sense to those who believe in coincidence. And this is where the story gets strange. In the early 2000s, Pedro Dom was no longer just a thief. He was a symbol. The media called him the cat burglar of the South Zone. He was the handsome, blonde boy who could charm doormen and scale walls to enter the apartments of the ultra-rich. But his father, Victor, the police officer who had dedicated his life to fighting the drug trade, was living a private hell. He watched his son spiral into cocaine addiction. He watched the boy he raised with discipline become a creature of the night. But the strangest detail wasn't the crime. It was the resemblance. Ilma, the biological mother who never stopped searching, was watching the news one evening. The screen showed a grainy photo of the cat burglar. Most people saw a criminal. Ilma saw a ghost. She saw the jawline. She saw the eyes. She contacted a journalist. She told her story. The DNA test was arranged. When the results came back, they didn't just solve a crime. They shattered the families. Pedro Dom, the golden boy of a police officer, was Roberto, the stolen baby from 1978. The lie had lasted 25 years. Imagine the moment the truth was delivered to Pedro, a man who already felt like he didn't belong anywhere, suddenly finding out that his entire childhood, his mother's face, his father's name was a fabrication. Investigators noticed something unexpected in the aftermath of the reveal. Pedro didn't run to his biological mother for salvation. He retreated further into the shadows, as if the truth was the one thing he couldn't survive. Now, we enter the territory of theories, the nature versus nurture. Debate. Did Pedro become a criminal because it was in his blood? Or did the subconscious trauma of being stolen create a void that only adrenaline and drugs could fill? Some believe Aurora, the woman who stole him, knew the truth would destroy him, They believe she raised him in a state of psychological instability to keep him dependent. Others look at Victor. How does a high-level intelligence officer not realize his own son has no birth record that matches? Was he a victim of a woman's desperate lie, or did he choose to look the other way because he wanted a son so badly? The what-if haunts this case like a fog. If Roberto had stayed with Ilma in the humble suburbs of Rio, would he have been a normal man? Or was the Dom, the talent for the shadows, already written in his DNA? The theories in the criminal underworld of Rio say something else. They say Pedro Dom knew, not the facts, but the feeling. They say he robbed the rich because, in his mind, he was reclaiming a life that had been stolen from him. Every diamond he took, every luxury watch, was a piece of a puzzle he couldn't finish. He wasn't just a thief. He was a man trying to buy back a soul that had been traded in a hospital hallway in 1978. But you can't buy back the truth. And the police were no longer looking for a lost boy. They were looking for a target. The truth didn't set Pedro Dom free. It paralyzed him. When the DNA confirmed he was the stolen baby, Roberto, the world expected a homecoming. They expected a son to run into the arms of a mother who had waited 25 years. But Pedro didn't know how to be Roberto. He only knew how to be the ghost Rora had created. The spiral became a free fall. By 2005, the cat burglar was no longer a shadow. He was a target. The police, the same force his father Victor had served for decades, were closing in. The setting was the Bucas Tunnel, a concrete artery in the heart of Rio. September 15th, Pedro was on a grenade-laden motorcycle, trying to break through a blockade. The blonde boy, the son of the law, was now the enemy of the state. The shootout was brief, violent. In the end, Pedro was hit. He sought refuge in a trash container inside a building's hallway. Imagine the irony. The boy who was stolen from a clean hospital bed ended his life surrounded by the city's waste. He died at 23. A life that began with a lie ended in a hail of lead. The dead end is where the families are left to pick up the pieces. Victor, the police officer, lost his son twice, once to the streets and once to the truth. Ilma, the biological mother, finally found her Roberto, but she found him in a morgue. She spent 25 years looking for a child, only to bury a stranger. Aurora, the woman who started it all, was convicted. But you can't imprison a lie once it has grown into a man. The legal system called it kidnapping. The streets called it fate. But the real dead end is the identity that was never lived. Somewhere in the archives of Rio, there is a file for Roberto. It is thin, empty. And there is a file for Pedro Dom. It is thick, violent. Neither of them tells the whole story. We're here. Your destination. Look at those buildings up there. They say every window in Rio has seen a secret, but this one was hidden in plain sight. Pedro Dom was a man who lived a life that wasn't his. He died for a name he was never supposed to have. Investigators noticed something unexpected at the very end. In his pocket, they didn't find jewelry or money. They found nothing but the weight of a past he couldn't outrun. To this day, no one truly knows where the stolen baby ended and the monster began. Was he born to be a thief, or was he robbed of the chance to be anything else? The meter is off. Watch your step on the way out. The pavement is slippery when it's this quiet.